gentlemen, Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us today on this massive announcement. I have to admit, when I heard about it, it's pretty exciting. I don't think there's anything else like it out there. Your Excellency, can you sort of give us a little bit more detail on this fund and its ability to assist that transformation from a private to public company on the ADX?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, the announcement was made earlier this year, and the overall picture of the fund was given, which is a $5 billion, investing up to 40% of the float and focus on sectors that are important to the economy. What we announced today is the granular detail of the design of the fund, and in the design phase, we wanted to make it relevant and agile. We today heard about the bear market, the bullish market, and now the falcon economy. And we wanted to make sure that the fund is relevant throughout those cyclical environments. And hence, when we first started, it was mainly a fund. But the reality is it became much more a fund. It's, in reality, an ecosystem enablement where we work closely to support the institutionalization of IPO-ready companies to join ADX as their main platform, and the commitment from both the government side, the ecosystem side, and the issuer side to be based in Abu Dhabi and expand regionally. We have witnessed a big shift in the way the fund design came about, because we found out that they don't only want our money. In a bullish market, you don't want the money only. You want the advisory. You want the ease of doing business. You want that special taking care of advocating policy changes, addressing market gaps, and ensuring at the same time you get the right independent advice. So what do we mean? What is that going to happen or do? We look at sustainable development of the equity market with the right companies, the right governance, the right legal structure, the financial story to come. So while the market is bullish, we're still going to ensure that we get the right companies to issue in Abu Dhabi.
And I think what's really important that struck me about the fund, of course, is the cash. People are always interested in the cash, but it's the support element. And Andrew, I wanted to bring you in on this. There's a lot of myths out there when a lot of companies, family offices, smaller companies, they go, oh, it's too expensive for an IPO. It's not for me. You know, it's too much hard work. How are you going to see companies transition from private to public? What do you think is going to give them the final push?
Yeah, I think one of the key things when you're looking to do an IPO is really looking around mindset change, because essentially it's probably one of the biggest corporate events that you will have actually experienced as a company going forward. And it's really understanding that there's different stakeholders when you bring equity into your balance sheet from the public markets. So it's really understanding that there's a democratization, if you like, of your stakeholdership. And that really is important, that the chairman, the CEO, and the board really understands that sort of elements around conflicts of interest, transparency, corporate governance, and really understanding that it's not just sort of, say, your family business that was run in a certain way. It just needs to take that little step forward in terms of a democratization, if you like, of the mindset.
And Alec, I want to bring you in on this because, of course, a lot of companies have talked about, we've got very much a local perspective on this, and that's important, but you're plugged into the world. I mean, you are, of course, but JP Morgan has got that international sort of perspective. How are they seeing outside this region the possibility to list on this exchange and perhaps be helped on that journey?
Sure. Look, I think first up, I would say this, some of what the world is really thinking right now is borne out in the numbers. And those numbers, I'll quote two, are one, that the ADX trades at the second highest multiple for an all sector exchange. So the NASDAQ, for example, trades at 25 times, but that's a growth exchange. If you look at the S&P, it trades at 17 times, and the ADX trades at 16 times. It sort of says clearly that companies are well valued here, and when they think about the points that Andrew was making right now, this remains that sort of a strong destination for IPOs. So investors are certainly noticing that. And the second thing is that if you look at the UAE's component of the MSCI index, that has tripled in the last 18 months. And a lot of that is led basically by the ADX. And we think that there is really more room to grow. This year has been a year where you've seen actually outflows from the emerging markets, but the ADX has seen almost $3 billion of inflows from overseas, and this is not including the IPOs. So when you put all of this together, when you look at the strong stable of companies which are really actually high-class, world-class companies which are coming to the ADX market to list. We think that there is, going to be increased focus from international investors, and there is plenty to go in terms of getting that global attention to the ADX.
And just to add to that, I mean, obviously, one of the drivers there from Alok is around suitability. And one of the things to build on what Samer is saying, the Abu Dhabi IPO fund will help to look and through that due diligence prism to actually create really quality issuers. So it's not just the cash point. Yes, it gives cash funding to actually assist going forward and de-risk slightly on the cost side, but it's also an incredible investment team that sits in the Abu Dhabi IPO fund. And they are actually going to be looking at these particular issuers from an operational standpoint, from a financial standpoint, from a legal regulatory standpoint. And then that helps with having suitable issuers, which builds the exchange and it self-perpetuates.
And I think you make a good point. A big part of the fund is the support, because it's overwhelming I've worked with companies that need to IPO. I've worked with them a lot, and when you're smaller, it's very, very overwhelming for many different reasons. Even as big banks, governance is difficult, right? So I'm going to go to a slightly more controversial topic, not really, Martin, bringing you in on momentum. We've had a great year. Yes, we're decoupled. Do we need to be scared? Because some people have sort of said, we're slightly worried with what's going on in the rest of the world, that it might just slow the momentum down globally, and we, of course, might be affected here.
Well, we remain very, very optimistic and very positive about the outlook, for the foreseeable future, Sarah. You're right that it has been a fantastic last 18 months. We have seen about more than 15 deals, happening, both public, private, happening over the last year and a half. And by the way, Abu Dhabi has done particularly well in that context, but we have seen also a good number of new issuances happening in Dubai and in Tadawul as well in Saudi. So the region has been very well on a journey which has started about 18 months ago. After a long winter, let's remember that between 2017 and 2021, there was not much happening. So this is really great news, to see how the market has responded, and how successful have been the latest transactions. Now, I fundamentally believe, that the fundamentals which are supporting the market are still there, liquidity, oil price, which does create liquidity in the market, so that's certainly beneficial. But beyond that, we have now the ecosystem between regulators, government, banks, law firms, etc. And we have a much more mature market, understanding much better, what makes a successful IPO. So still very optimistic, and we believe when we look at the pipeline, that there is still the potential for a good number of new issuances in Abu Dhabi in particular.
And Martin, you make a good point. We're seeing a lot of this word partnership, and I think very much that's what this fund is, a partnership, as we just mentioned. So Sif, what's been your experience with this on the ADX?
Until now, our experience on ADX, we've listed around 6 ETFs on the ADX. And the way we are looking at this is a little bit different. So we are agreement with everyone that was mentioned until now. But what we are looking forward to is the continuation of building the ecosystem with the access to long-term money in the region. Your biggest issue today, not only in the UAE, but all over the Arab world, is that there is no long-term money dedicated to the stock market. Here we mean pension funds, we mean endowments, we mean even the sovereign wealth funds. The sovereign wealth funds across the region have always been great investing abroad, which is understandable, but with the shift that we've seen in the last 3-4 years, the political shift and the political will to start building our own equity capital markets, there has to be some sort of a direction where the regulators, the central bank, will start looking at products in our part of the world and directing local investments into it. And I'm not talking about, we're not reinventing the wheel. We look at the US, we look at Europe, you will find UCITS, where all the institutional investors onshore have to invest through it. We'll find the Act 40 in the US, and this is what we're looking forward to, is we are positioned, or we are looking forward to becoming an asset manager in the region that is looking for long-term money coming from the pensions, from the insurance, from the sovereigns, and that's how we've positioned ourselves.
Alok, I loved what you said before, earlier to me. You said arguably an IPO is the initial start button, you know, like the ignition for a company's capital market journey. So, as I said, you that global perspective. Where do you think these transactions are going to evolve, and where are they going to come from? Because we've got a load of family offices, a load of small companies. Is there a particular sector or a particular area that you think is going to be strong?
I think this is what makes this region extremely strong in the ADX, because I think the IPOs will come from really across the board. Going back to the earlier point, there is just a stable of really high-class companies that are waiting to come to the IPO market. I think those are clearly across many industrial sectors across the UAE. I think I would also say that there will be a pivot at some point in time towards growth and tech. I think that is inevitable. We are all very well versed with, how strongly volatile those markets and sectors have been through the course of this year. But some of them are actually pretty fundamental in terms of how they are developing, and we will see a shift back. So I think clearly, as the ADX expands and it grows and deepens in terms of the cohort of companies it welcomes, I would expect some of that to come to this market as well. It will certainly be anchored by private enterprise, whether that's led by family offices or otherwise, and we see that growth actually coming through very strongly as well.
Now I'm going to ask you, Your Excellency, a question, and you might say just yes, but if you could expand. I was going to say, family businesses in the UAE, in your mind, ready to go public?
It's a very broad question to me. For us, there is champions and there is hidden jewels. What we also look at, we are a developmental fund. So we, end of the day, protect the investor as well. We want to make sure it's a successful IPO. So we look at different fundamentals. One, does it have a possible story, a growth story, a strategy? Does it have a geographic footprint or plans to expand as a product? The sponsor that have in the past, previous institutional sponsors or no? We look at the board. Is the board all executive or there is non-executives? We also look at the management. Are they ready? The governance. So once they pass all those checks for us, we understand what needs to be diagnosed to help them. Right? We're just not going to go for the fact, oh, it's a family office, let's just go and make it happen. No, we want to diagnose it, understand it, and create a roadmap for them, for the transformation to become IPO ready. And that's, I think, the difference between the different ecosystem players. Everyone will look at from a legal, from an audit, from an investment bank, they're narrow pipe. What the fund does, we collaborate with all of this. And guess what? Not only that we found that we only collaborate, sometimes you require policy changes. Like if you look at, for example, growth companies today, they're not profitable, but they have a growth plan. How do you bypass the regulatory hurdles? We help them, and we explain the story, and we handhold them throughout the whole journey. And that's, I think, the essence of the fund.
And you make a really interesting point, I think it's worth reiterating, is that fact it's not a fund that just has money, and you're going to just rubber stamp people that come.
Absolutely
You'll
not.
support them, but they need to tick certain boxes.
I could tell you today with this equity market, you will rarely see our name on any investment because it's already oversubscribed. Why do we need to crowd the private sector or the investors?
But you would if you needed to?
If we needed to, so that's where the reversal comes. That's where we are not a cornerstone, to make it clear. We are a last resort investor. So if the issue is doing very well, we step back, let the private sector win. This is a true PPP. If it's undersubscribed, we come in as a cyclical support to make sure it's stabilized. We stabilize the price, and we come in and we hold the price for 3 years and more.
Just in case for an unfortunate timing on market, which is really important, because as you say, there's quality companies out there that need that. So, Andrew, bringing you back on this, we talked about the readiness there. What's feeling the temperature out there, what do you feel the readiness is for companies and family offices to start to go down this route?
Well, to be fair, Sammy really sort of touched on, some of the key elements, which is things like financial reporting, making sure that your internal reporting is actually sort of up to scratch. How are your financials prepared? Make sure they're in IFRS. Look towards sort of what are the future requirements for an IPO, for example. And for us, I mean, it's about education. Doing an IPO seems like a mammoth journey, and there's so many parts to it, and it's very frightening. And at what stage do you get to find out how to do an IPO? And I think it's start early, get in with these family businesses, see if an IPO is actually the right thing for them, what assets within the perimeter are appropriate for IPOing, because not everything is for IPO necessarily. So the educational piece is really important, actually, and demystifying the IPO process and some of the sort of scarier aspects, which is losing control of your business. That's not necessarily true, and it's getting over those sort of slight hurdles in terms of education. And one thing that we're doing with the ADX is actually reaching out to family businesses and just saying, look, we'll come for an hour and we'll speak to you about some of the things that we're talking about now. And that will hopefully aid the conversation and lead to more IPOs on the ADX for family businesses.
So we've got the framework, we've got the cash, we've got the support. Martin, I'm going to put you on the spot, valuation, because at the end of the day, that's when an IPO comes to market. People want to make returns, whether it's short term or long term, hopefully it's longer term. But where do you see valuation in this region going, given what's happening in the markets?
I think so far the region has been quite moving in a direction independently, from what we have seen happening in other markets. And it's fair to say that the Middle East has represented about 50% of all new issuances in the EMEA region. So it shows that there is a dynamic, which is really the one of the Middle East on its own. Valuations, as we have seen them, there has been an evolution. It has started with GREs, now we are moving to private enterprises. It was, I think, a number of transactions with GREs in particular have been priced in a way which was deliberately set, to make those transactions appealing. And as illustrated, by the amount of oversubscription that we have seen, which was even sometimes so big, that it was difficult to service and allocate a decent amount, to individual customers. So valuation is important. Now we are moving, we are moving on, and we see now the market moving to more private enterprises. So those deals will be driven by other criteria, other parameters, even if valuation remains important. We see more sophistications also on some transactions. The dual listing, which is happening today, is a very big step forward. It shows also more regional integration. So, and ability for customers to have an exposure on several countries in the same transaction. So there will be more complex transactions, and more diversification in terms of industry sectors, but it remains that valuation, expected yield, will remain paramount, for the success of deals going forward.
And Steve, I know you sort of touched on opportunities, but what opportunities do you see within Abu Dhabi and the broader region? What are you focusing on that you think might come to market?
What we've done earlier in the year is we launched the first SPAC. Our holding company launched the first SPAC in the Middle East. And what we're hopeful of is to try to bring a new sector to the market, which will mean new valuations to the market, a new learning curve to the investors, where I remember back in the day, like in the early 2000s, when telcos started to get listed and no one understood how to value telecoms. So we're hopeful that we'll bring technology, a technology listing into the market, and that will start adding more momentum, because our belief is that Abu Dhabi, from where it stands today and ADGM and all the support, like for instance, the IPO fund and the political will in Abu Dhabi today will cater for a center for these type of listings in the Arab world.
Alok, I want to just pose this question to you, although you can all jump in, is that an IPO is just the start of a journey as well, isn't it, when it comes to access and capital to some companies. Where do we see it going beyond that? What do you think will be created as a result of these listings and then obviously an expansion of the financial market?
No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, it's probably the single most important event in a company's life history, but it's certainly only one, and there is a journey thereafter. I think what we feel incredibly positive about here in Abu Dhabi is that there is clearly a framework. Saif just talked about the SPAC that they listed earlier this year. There is clearly a framework for follow-on offerings, for derivative-led instruments, structured instruments, all of that going forward, and all of that is really, really important in the life cycle of a listed company. I think one of the other things is, from a technical perspective, if you look at the Abu Dhabi Exchange has increased its liquidity in the last 2 years 8 times. There is still clearly greater depth to be sought, but in terms of a stable, targeted, strategic governance and regulatory framework, which is sort of ticking all of these boxes and enabling its listed companies to have options once they are actually listed, I don't think anyone is doing as good a job. And I think, if I may, Sarah, just one piece on the valuation question, since I believe in it pretty strongly. I think this will remain a premium market from a valuation standpoint. It is today, but it also has that perfect mix of, you've got the right macro, you have that stable and strong governance and regulatory framework, you have a great set of companies, you have a deep local pool of demand, which is now sort of accentuated by the setting up of the IPO fund, and you have an increasing interest from global investors. So certainly for foreseeable future, we think this remains a premium valuation market.
So, Your Excellency, maybe a cheeky question. Sorry, I always have cheeky questions.
You're keeping all the cheeky ones for me.
Yeah. And that's, as I believe, there's access to local companies and at the moment. But obviously, given what everybody's saying, and we've seen it, the increased interest globally in coming to live and work and trade here in the region, in the capital, and in the UAE. Are you going to open it to other companies just outside of your borders eventually?
So let me take the IPO fund hat off and put my economic hat on.
Okay.
Abu Dhabi strategy is to diversify. Today, non-oil contribution to GDP has surpassed 50%. Manufacturing and other sectors, being manufacturing number one in terms of its contribution to GDP, and other sectors following, is where we are focusing to attract talent, to scale companies, to create local champions, and to also invite FDI. We as government during the pandemic have created or had many operating assets. Abu Dhabi Investment Office is one of the flagships we have, who focus on attraction, facilitation, and anchoring biggest FDIs, and they've signed up with almost all the big names without mentioning them and going through details. We have created Abu Dhabi Resident Office, who their job is also to attract, facilitate, and retain talent. We have also created the industrial strategy as a 10 billion program for manufacturing subsidies and grants and so forth. So we have so many. I could stay the whole day giving all our programs. I don't want to spend it on that. You could go to our webpage and you will know more about the programs. The key essence, what we're trying to do with the IPO fund, is to, one, attract top-class companies to listen ADX, our partner. But not only that, we want to also look at the future. SPAC, I think, as you mentioned, ADX and DED have worked closely together with the regulator to come up with that regulations. We've actually worked hand in hand with them, and it was a role model of other new asset classes that are going to be rolled out. We're talking about the new asset classes and new shares, preferred shares, late-stage shares. We're looking at now securitization. So all those ideas have been done in the past. Execution was lagging. But today, with the ecosystem we have here, and I think I would like to use the SPAC model as one example. We literally work with a true public and private consultation. So we had our core banks, we had our core investment. I think 2 of them are here today as well. We've worked hand in hand. We listened to the market. We put the right regulations. the right governance. And I think that's a true reflection of the ecosystem we've created and how Adibuf and DED is plugging in the picture together.
I think that word ecosystem and partnership keeps cropping up quite rightly, because like you said, it's not just the visible partnerships, but it's the stuff and the consultation that goes on below. I'm going to give you another question in quick fire, and it's more of a personal one. When you're looking back, obviously we've launched this today, what would make you very happy in, say, 5, 10 years' time to look back at the market, IPOs being one part of that, and think, we're really on the map now? I mean, I know you're on the map, but even more on the map.
For me, ultimately, it boils down to wealth creation, right? We want to see people are well invested, have savings, have a good asset and a growth story. We spoke about insurance company and pension fund. They need to play a bigger role in asset allocation and to the right assets. And it's all about wealth creation. ADX, us, most of the players here, end of the day, everyone is going to do his part. What I want to see in 10 years' time, this economy is wealthy, it's sustainable, it's developed, we have the right companies, the right consumption on the ground here is done not from imports, it's from we are exporting. That's what I see. And that's what the strategy is going. We're opening gateways with India, with Israel. We're facilitating trade with a lot of corridors. We're attracting a lot of investors to decentralize them, to have hubs here in Abu Dhabi and to access the world from here. And that's the vision of the leadership. We're all playing our part here. I think we're playing it well so far. And I hope we continue.
And I think most people would agree. They're all nodding. Great. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, Your Excellency, for... we could talk all day, couldn't we? Because there's just so much to say on this. But I think it's a great, announcement today, the full details of this fund, and we look forward to monitoring it in the future. But meanwhile, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.